Everybody, welcome to week 12 of this course. Gosh, I can't believe it's already almost the end of the semester. So I hope you guys all had a great weekend. The section this week is on IEP paperwork, but really more specifically, it's on all of the required components of the transition plan, also known as Indicator 13. So that's why you'll kind of see it called both of those things. But Indicator 13 is essentially a way that Office of Special Education Programs at the federal level measures our state in terms of compliance around the transition plan. So there are 8 components in the transition plan. They all have to be correct and compliant to count as one whole compliant transition plan. So it's very important that you as teachers really understand not only how to be compliant, but certainly how to have a quality transition plan. And we have talked a lot about that in the past when we were talking a few weeks about the importance of really having really rich transition assessment data and information, because that is the foundation of a quality and compliant transition plan. So today we're going to kind of pick up where we left off a couple of weeks ago. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll go through the rest of this. I've been having trouble with my computer all day. It's really slow, so I'm really hoping things are going to work out. But so if you remember a few weeks back when we talked about kind of my intro to transition as a whole, and also we talked a lot about transition assessments a few weeks ago, I presented the same colorful flow chart for you. And that's really to emphasize that everything on the transition plan, which is embedded in the IEP, is not just, a form to fill out, but it truly, truly is a process. So that's why we really like to show this flow chart to really emphasize that this isn't just a form, but it's a meaningful process, right? Starting with that meaningful participation of students in the whole process, no matter what their, ability or their disability. We really want to make sure that students are a part of this process. So that's kind of that top gray box you're seeing. Then we have the rich transition assessment information, those SPINs, the strengths, interests, preferences, and transition needs of the student. So we really want to take into account all of that information. And then from that, we're going to focus here. We'll start with writing those post-secondary goals. And what I mean by those are those future goals for the student. What is the student going to be doing after they leave your school? After they leave your LEA. So meaning, they could be leaving at age 18 with their senior cohort, or they could be staying for those post-high services where many of our students with complex needs do need additional transition services. So they often do stay until they're 21 or 22. So these goals, these post-secondary goals really have to be written for after they leave the LEA. And sometimes that's confusing. And you see goals that are written for what the student might do the next year or in post-high services, but keep in mind that these goals really are for what happens after they leave the K-12 system, right, and go on to those post-secondary settings. So I'm going to provide you lots of examples. And then after you develop these measurable post-secondary goals, then you'll be deciding or really determining what those individualized transition services the student needs to get closer to those goals. So we will dive into that, and then we'll talk about the other component here in yellow, which is that course of study. So we have to outline what courses will the student take to, again, help support those post-secondary goals. Then we'll get into annual IEP goal writing. And then the purple part here on the flow chart is that really important coordination with outside agencies. And we talked a lot about this collaboration with outside agencies a few weeks back. So, and then of course, all of this, if we do this well, and we're really targeting these services and we're writing these appropriate goals for students, then ultimately what we want to see is that a student has a positive post-school outcome, meaning that they are hopefully employed, going on for further education and training when they leave schools, and are living as independently or participating in the community as independently as possible. So post-secondary goals, these are the big picture goals, right? So these are for the future, as I just mentioned. They should be written as they are going to occur after school. And they should be based again on all that rich information that we've gotten through those transition assessments, and recognizing that they're going to change. So I know sometimes it's hard to, have a conversation with a student who's very young in 8th grade, and we're asking them to, what do you want to do in the future, right? So we're writing these goals for when they leave school, and that's challenging. And we also recognize that they're going to change not only annually, but possibly weekly. And that's totally okay. It's just, in that moment. So let's say the students in 8th or 9th grade, based on the information that we know about them and the assessments we've done, what is the best, post-secondary goal we can write for that student, given the information that we know and that they are, providing for us as well. So just to be super clear, I'm going to show you kind of slides of what this looks like in our Utah model form. And what I mean by that is when you're back in your school districts, every school district has a different IEP platform. So the form for transition planning might look a little different depending on where you are teaching. But all of those have to match and have to include what is on our state model form. And that's right here in the QR code. I've also linked it in the Canvas course. So I'm going to pull sections out of our model form accordingly to all the different sections that we're going to go over in this video. So the first one, obviously being those measurable post-secondary goals, have to be based on all that rich assessment information that you've gathered. And there are 3 post-secondary goals, 2 of which are required for all students with disabilities. So there must be one for what they'll be doing in terms of employment. So a post-secondary goal for employment. There must be another goal, a second one for post-secondary education and training. What are they going to be doing for their further education and training? And then the third one is for independent living skills. And it says considered not needed because it is not required for every student with a disability to have an independent living goal, but we highly recommend it, right? And I think especially the population you're working with, students with more complex needs, really, really ought to have an independent living skills goal. And we argue that just about every student with a disability should have a independent living goal. And then where it says basis of decision, what that means is we've added this in the state to kind of, I think ask the question of IEP teams like, okay, if you're going to check the box where it says considered not needed, what are you basing that on? Is that just your opinion? You just don't want to write an independent living, goal. You just don't think they need one. So that basis for decision is not a compliant, like a requirement necessarily, but it's really for a special ed teacher and IEP teams to kind of say, have we really done enough assessment in the area of independent living to check the box considered not needed? So really it's kind of to to get folks to think, gosh, have I assessed well enough in this area to really say that they don't need it, which in most cases probably is not the case. So that's why that is kind of newly added to the post-secondary goals section. So what do we mean when we're talking about post-secondary goals for education and training? Again, these are the future goals. So it could be that a student is going to go on to a college, right? But not only that, it can be so many more things. So here's a list. I'm not going to read them all, but I think you'll get the idea that there are many ways that students can go on and continue to learn. It doesn't have to be a 2 or 4-year college. It can be any of these kinds of, ways that a student can further their education and training. So in other words, you could write a post-secondary goal that a student, is going to have on-the-job training, for example, or they're going to take a digital learning course or some other kind of a certification, a special vocational certification, for example. So that's what we mean when we're talking about post-secondary education and training, is all of the things on this list. And then when it comes to employment, we are mainly talking about competitive integrated employment. So meaning that, an individual should be employed in the community with non-disabled peers, but knowing that many students might need supported employment, they might need customized employment. Maybe a student wants to be self-employed, they're starting their own business, or maybe they are going to be working in a family business. So these are all like different types or forms of employment that we would want to consider and write into those post-secondary goals. And then independent living, I mean, this list can be even longer, but here's just some ideas around independent living. It isn't just, oh, they're going to live with parents, forever, or they're going to live completely independently in an apartment, right? Independent living covers a lot of different things. So maybe that goal looks like they will still be living at home, but they're going to be making their lunch every day, or they're going to be, using public transportation to get to college, for example. So think of independent living a lot more broadly than just like physically where the student's going to be living. So that's how we want to think about writing the post-secondary goal for independent living. So let's go back to how do you make sure that you are writing these goals appropriately? So of course, you would want to ask yourself some of these questions. Does the post-secondary goal section for a student's IEP have at least 2 goals? Because remember, there needs to be one for employment, and there needs to be one separate one for further education and training, and then also that third one for independent living, if the assessment shows that that is needed. And then they have to have active language. So we don't want to write goals like the student should, or the student might, or maybe. It has to have active language. So often we'll see the word will in there, and I'm going to provide you some examples. And then making sure that there's a statement about when that goal is going to occur. It has to be after they leave, after they graduate, after they age out. So that'll have to be included. And I'm going to share with you in a minute a formula that I know for me, when I was a special ed teacher, was super helpful in writing these goals, because they are very different than writing annual IEP goals. You'll see that in a minute. And then a couple of other questions are they appropriate for the student? And also, have they been updated? So what we don't want to see is that post-secondary goal, remain the same from 9th grade all the way to 12th grade, for example, because we know students, change their minds, or we have more information on them and they've had more opportunity to try different things. So they need to be updated annually on that annual transition assessment information and data that you're collecting before the IEP, of course. So here's that formula I talked about, and this was really helpful. So you don't have to follow this exactly, but essentially this has got all those compliant components that you really want to pay attention to. So for example, you could start with the statement after high school, or after completion of post-high services, if the student's staying until they're 21 or 22, the student will, let's say, have a job at a retail store with the support of a job coach. So you want to kind of ask yourself the question, like, can I see the student doing this, right? So if I look down the road 5 years, can I see the student doing it? So it has to be an observable behavior. And then you can add information as to where that's going to happen or how that's going to happen. And I'll provide you a bunch of examples. Here we go. So here are some examples of ways to write compliant post-secondary goals. So after graduation from high school, Maria will be enrolled in cooking classes at the Utah Independent Living Center. So it's got that statement of when it's going to occur after she graduates. It's got active language, Maria will, and it says exactly what she'll be doing. She'll be enrolling in a cooking class at the Independent Living Center. So this is an example of a post-secondary goal for further education and training. And then the next one, Nate will attend Wolverines Elevated to study art and design after he graduates high school. So you notice that statement about when it's going to occur is at the end of this goal. That's totally fine. It doesn't have to be at the beginning, but it's got all the components. It says when it's going to occur. It's got active language. And it's, pretty specific where he's going to attend and even what he's going to study. Now, a younger student, they might have an idea that they're going to go to college, but maybe they haven't named that college. They don't know what they want to major in, and that's okay. Like this next one is probably a younger student. So after post-high services, I will work in the music industry with the support of a job coach. So probably a younger student, loves music, doesn't know exactly what that might look like. And as the student gets older, usually these goals get a little more specific, but they're pretty general when the student is younger. And again, this is in the first person. This is in the student's voice, I will, and that's absolutely fine as well, as long as it's got that active language. The next one, after graduation, Peter will work part-time in the construction industry. So maybe Peter's not exactly sure if he wants to do plumbing or carpentry, but he knows he wants to do something with his hands. He's maybe got some exposure to construction. And so this goal is compliant. It's got that active language. It says when it's going to occur. And it's based on, some transition assessment information around his interests and his preferences and his skills. So the last one, after exiting post-high services, Lori will independently make her own lunch every day. So this is an example of an independent living post-secondary goal. So again, this isn't just where they're going to live, but this is that expectation that this student is going to be making their lunch every day by themselves when they exit school. So that's an example of an independent living goal. So now I'm going to provide you with some non-examples, and these are actual non-examples that we have found on IEPs across the state. So Pedro wants to work with animals either at a shelter or a vet office. So it doesn't have active language, it just says wants. This really more is a statement that maybe belongs in a PLAFUP, right? Maybe this is information that you learned about a student from an assessment, for example, but it's not a goal because it doesn't have active language. It doesn't say when it will occur. That part is missing. So that would have to be fixed if that was written as a post-secondary goal. And then the next one, after high school, Sue will learn vocational skills in a post-high program. So remember, post-high programs are those 18 to 22-year-old programs that many students with complex needs stay in their schools districts for. So this would have to be changed to after Sue leaves the post-high program, she will be employed maybe at a dentist office, for example, prepping the equipment for the dentist, for example. And again, this one just says vocational skills, so it doesn't really speak to any preference or interest the student has. So that goal is not compliant. The next one, the fall after graduation from high school, Allison plans to enroll in Aggies Elevated. So this one's close, right? It's got when it's going to occur, fall after graduation. It says that, she may go to Aggies Elevated, but the problem here is it doesn't have active language. It just says plans, and we want it to say, will be enrolled in. So that will have to change a little bit. And then the last one, after high school, Jane should learn to dress herself. So again, this really isn't a goal. It's really just kind of a statement of need, which belongs more in a PLAFUP. So that would have to change to have active language when it's going to occur and exactly what she's going to do around that independent living goal of dressing. So those are non-examples. And now I'm going to throw some out there and see if you can identify if they are or are not compliant. After high school, Luis will attend college majoring in graphic design. So it's got that after high school statement, and it's got active language, and it says exactly that he's going to go on to college and even what he's going to major on. So yes, that one is compliant. The second one, after post-high, Rachel will work part-time at a retail clothing store with the support of a job coach. Again, this one has all of those components that are compliant. They've got the active language, where it's going to occur, what the student's going to be doing for employment, and what that looks like in terms of the support. So that's a compliant goal. Tom would like to work with animals. That one is not compliant, right? It's not a goal. It's really just information. So that, again, probably is just information that should have been added to a PLAFUP statement after transition assessment information was gathered. Maria should learn job skills in post-high. Again, not a goal and not written for after the student leaves the LEA, does not say specifically, what type of job the student would have. So that is not compliant. Tiffany will need supports in her job and at home. Again, kind of a need statement, belongs in a PLAFUP, but definitely not a post-secondary goal. And Luke will receive on-the-job training at a medical supply company with the support of a job coach. So again, this one states when it's going to happen. And it has active language that he'll receive on-the-job training, but what it is missing is when it's going to occur. So it needs to have that statement of after post-high services or after high school or after graduation, then it would be compliant, but it is close. And then after graduation, Carly will live at home and do her own laundry each week. This one is a fully compliant goal for independent living. It's got the when it's going to occur after graduation. It's got active language, and it says exactly, what she's going to be doing independently at that time. So those are compliant. So here are a couple of other ones that we're going to kind of fix. And these are actual ones from IEPs that in school districts that I work with. But after leaving school, Joe will participate in work-related tasks with the supportive adult provider agencies. So this was a goal on an IEP, a transition plan, but it really doesn't tell you much, right? Like she's going to participate in work-related tasks. Like, what does that mean? It really doesn't say what area of interest or employment she is going to be doing after. So how do we improve that? Here's some examples. How about this? After leaving school, Joe will work or volunteer at the animal shelter with the support of a job coach. Oh, okay. So now this is happening when she leaves school. She's interested in animals, right? So she's going to be working at an animal shelter, potentially taking care of the animals there. So that's one way we can improve that goal. So here's the independent living goal for Joe as was written on her transition plan. After leaving school, Joe will participate in strength and flexibility activities and vision skills while living with her home host provider. Okay, it's got when it's going to occur, it's got active language, but still, if I were to pick this up, I don't know what participating in strength and flexible activities and vision skills really, was expected of her. So how can we improve that to really reflect the students', spins, right? So how about this? After leaving school, Joe will use eye gaze or a switch to choose what she wants to eat for breakfast each day. So this would be an example of an independent living goal for a student with some pretty complex needs, but it's much more specific, right? So we would expect her to have instruction and practice around either using her eye gaze to make choices, or switch to choose what she wants to eat for breakfast every day. So that's kind of independent living, self-advocacy, choice making, kind of a post-secondary goal for a student with complex needs. Here is the last non-example of Joe's goal for education and training. It was written as, after leaving high school, Joe will participate in community experiences with adult support. How can we improve this? We don't really know what community experiences Joe might like, right? It doesn't give me a whole lot of information. It's very vague. After leaving high school, Joe will receive on-the-job training on how to groom cats at the animal shelter. So she will receive that further education and training in the form of a job coach, expanding her skills around grooming animals, specifically grooming cats at the animal shelter. So see how this is a whole lot more specific. So if we know that that's the end goal, we could be working on a lot of things, with Joe instead of just this, oh, we're going to take her out in the community, right? This is a lot more targeted towards her interests and her abilities. All right, since we're not live, we are not gonna actually do this activity, but you're gonna have that opportunity to either use a student that you're currently working with or the Carla case study to fill out a transition plan for a student. So we're gonna skip through this. Now, once we have written those measurable and quality post-secondary goals for the student, now we get to really talk about, all right, now that we know the post-secondary goal and some of the needs through assessments, what are the students' individualized transition services look like? And I always like to call this like the meat and potatoes of the transition plan, because to me, this is like the good stuff. This is like, those transition services that we're really going to provide the students. So let's talk about what transition services are. And I have this question, think about, if you want to stop the video and just kind of jot down, like, what do you think a transition service is? What do you know about transition services? So what would be some examples of transition services? So kind of, test your knowledge, and then we'll get into it more, and then you see if we're on the right track or not. Transition services honestly are probably the most confusing or misunderstood part of the transition plan, but in my mind, it's really one of the most important. So what are those transition services? The way that it's written in our rules is that they are a coordinated set of activities to facilitate movement from school to post-school activities in these areas, right? So they align with those post-secondary goals. There must be services for each post-secondary goal. So if the student has 3, there needs to be a service for each one of those, for education, for employment and career, and then also independent living or adult living. So here are some examples, and this again is kind of right out of the rules. What are we talking about when we're saying, coordinated set of activities, right? That could include targeted instruction. It could be related services. Maybe it's assistive technology instruction. It could be experiences in the form of a work-based learning experience out in the community, a job shadow or a job try or an internship. Development of employment and other post-school objectives. So I think anything that you're doing to help students, develop their skills around employment, whether that be, sometimes we call them soft skills, social skills. It could be that they do more interest inventories to really, figure out what it is that they like and are good at. And then it also could include daily living skills and functional vocational evaluation. So that's a lot. Daily living skills, like that list we had of independent living skills, that can be a lot of different things. So that's what I mean by transition services are kind of confusing because they can be so many things and they really need to be targeted to the student. So and again, this is what the community of adults provides the student. So sometimes what we see in this section of the transition plan is like another goal for the student. This is not an area of the plan where it should be written as a goal. It is what is the service that is being provided to them, meaning it could be the service can be provided by a special or general education teacher. It could be that a counselor is providing this, school counselor is providing this service. Could be a school club advisor. Maybe it's an outside agency. Maybe it's parents that are doing it or other community members. And all of this is to help the student progress to those post-secondary goals. In other words, getting them closer, like providing them actual skills, instruction, exposure, to get them closer to like hopefully actually reaching those post-secondary goals. So some questions you'd want to make sure that you ask yourself is, are career employment post-secondary transition services listed to reasonably able to enable the student to reach their post-secondary goals? So I think the question here is when you're writing the IEP, it's what in this year can we provide the student for transition services that helps them get closer to these 3 post-secondary goals. And I'm guessing with the students that you're going to be working with, you will have 3. You'll have that independent living goal too. So you'll really need to think about what is an appropriate service for each one of those. So this is again what the form looks like in Utah. This is the question. It says, what post-secondary transition services, activities, and or specialized instruction are needed during this annual IEP year for the student to develop the skills and knowledge to facilitate the movement towards those post-secondary goals? I know that's like a lot of words, right? But it's essentially saying, what are we providing the student this year to help them get closer to that, that dream, that post-secondary goal that they have set out and that the team has set out for them. Again, there's got to be 1 for each goal. So if the student has those 3 goals, then we'd want to see the 3 services. And we've also added recently this basis for decision. So again, is there a reason why the IEP team chose not to have an independent living goal? So because what we're seeing a lot of that considered not needed, where we really feel that students can benefit from those independent living skills, goals, and services. So you may see in your LEAs, this is kind of an older model and it's still out there a little bit, but some forms may have a 4th box. So in other words, there could be 1 for employment, 1 for education and training, 1 for independent living, and then there might be a separate one that says community experiences, but it's really not required under the law, but certainly it's something you want to consider. So in other words, a community experience could be a job shadow or an internship, and that service would then be an employment service, for example. Maybe the community experience is riding the bus, and that falls under, instruction on how to navigate public transportation, and then that would fall under independent living. So don't get thrown by that fourth box if you're in a school that uses an IEP platform that has a separate one for community experience. Think of it as possibly rolling into one of these other three areas. All right, so examples of what a transition service could be like, could be for a student, and exactly how to write it. Because again, we're not writing these as goals. We are writing, what are we giving the student? What is the community of adults giving the student? So here's just a short example list. We have a much bigger document called our Transition Services Examples document. I put that in the Canvas course. It's also linked here, and it's got the QR code. You can take a look at it. And that gives you just more ideas. It's not an end-all be-all list, but what's nice about it is it starts with young students in 7th and 8th grade and goes all the way to 22-year-olds. So it kind of is put in a timeline to give teachers an idea of what might be an appropriate transition service for a younger student versus an older student. So here's some examples. So it could be that somebody is going to support the student in arranging a tour of post-secondary programs. That could be a counselor, that could be a pre-eds provider, that could be the teacher, could be a parent even. They're going to go tour Aggies Elevated, for example, or Wolverines Elevated, or, Salt Lake Community College. That could be a service. Here's another example: instruction in using a visual checklist at a job site. So that's a very targeted instruction for a student that maybe is starting a internship. How do you use a visual checklist on a job? Support in obtaining a paratransit pass. If you have not heard of one of those, but that's UTA essentially has paratransit, which is like a door-to-door service. And a student needs to obtain, there's many steps to obtaining a pass for that, but it's a great thing to have as a student is, entering in their high school years and beyond. So that could be what the service is that they're getting support on how to fill out the paperwork needed for that and actually get that pass. The fourth one down, instruction and self-advocacy and disability awareness. This one's huge, right? We want all students to have some sort of instruction around, they can talk about their disability and then advocate for themselves. So that is a really important one for many students. Some others, internships in the medical field. If a student's really interested in medicine, let's say they want to be a doctor, right? Maybe they're just really interested in the whole idea of medicine or hospitals. So maybe they have an opportunity to have an internship. So that is something that can be a service that the team provides for them. Maybe it's support with the actual steps of applying for vocational rehabilitation services. Oftentimes we make the referral, but a student might need more supports. Maybe the family is not able to provide those supports. So somebody could, in the team could do that. Instruction in weekly budgeting. So that's a really targeted, service around budgeting if the student needs that. Instruction and support in public transportation, or instruction in using a picture communication app. So let's say the student has limited verbal language, and one of the main ways they're going to be able to communicate with coworkers and out in the community and friends is through a picture communication app, but they need targeted instruction. So that's kind of like a assistive technology service, right? But that can certainly also be a transition service and be written in the transition services section. So just that short list, but definitely check out the examples document as you're going to be writing out that transition plan, because I think that will be helpful. And just again, what we sometimes see in the transition services section, I'm going to start on the non-compliant side on the right-hand box, but sometimes we see some weird stuff in there, to be honest, and we'll see somebody will list a goal number. So instead of writing out what the service is for the student, they'll just refer to an IEP goal by number. That is not compliant. That was kind of an old practice that happened in our state. I'm not even really sure how that started, but that is not the intent of a transition service. We are not just linking a student's annual IEP goal and saying, that's it. Right? Because those are separate. Those are annual IEP goals. We really want to identify what is the service that's being given to the student. Sometimes we'll see things listed like, oh, the student's taking math class. Well, most students take math class. That's not a targeted transition service. So we don't want to see that in this section either. And then again, that considered not needed, box, we have to be really careful that we don't just click that box. without really making sure that we have determined that the student doesn't need a service in an area based on assessment data. And then sometimes we see PLAFUP-like statements, like I showed you before, like the student should do this, or they need support, right? It's really just a statement of need or what they should be doing. That's not compliant. We don't want to see that in the transition services section either. If it's information about a student's needs or their strengths or their interests, that belongs in the PLAFUP statement for transition assessment. So just to be really clear, what is considered non-compliant in the transition services section. Now we're going to flip to the left box. Compliant, we need to see a service that is provided by the LEA in this annual IEP year to help support that student. We need to see that there's alignment with those post-secondary goals, that the activities are aligned, and that the experiences are aligned. So whether it be instruction, activities, or experiences, all of those are considered transition services, but there's got to be some alignment. So in other words, if the student is interested in being a vet tech, we don't want to see a service that says they're going to be, doing an internship at a food place, at a restaurant, for example, right? That's not aligned with their interests. So that's what we look for as well. All right, so some things around effective practice. So kind of beyond compliance, we've talked a lot about the importance of self-advocacy and disability awareness. So, making sure that you're always like assessing that and how can we make the student more a better self-advocate, even if they have complex needs, right? By making choices and being a part of their IEP process and even being able to articulate their disability. I can't tell you how many students I worked with that, that were pretty verbal, but they had intellectual disabilities, but they had no idea why they were in special ed, or they did not know what their disability was. They didn't know, what their strengths were or their needs, or even what their disability was called. So think about those kinds of things. Community-based instruction next. We know students with complex needs have a really difficult time generalizing skills from the classroom into the community. So, you might be doing some simulation in classes, and I think that's okay, but really always keeping in mind that when we can teach things in the setting that we expect students to have that skill, that's much better. Work-based learning, I've talked about this before. So important that we provide work-based learning opportunities in the form of, internships, paid employment ideally, are super strong predictors that a student will have employment after they leave. We talked a little bit about assistive technology, but really making sure that we're looking at that for all students, right? Not just our students who can't use verbal language necessarily. So always consider assistive technology. And then pre-employment transition services. Those are services that can be brought in through vocational rehabilitation. There's many different ways that happens, but there's providers throughout our state that have relationships with schools. They can come in, provide services. They can do it, after school, weekends, summertime, but make sure that you're connecting with pre-ETs wherever you are, because this really aligns so nicely with transition services. And sometimes I think as a special ed teacher, you get overwhelmed thinking that you have to do it all, right? And you don't if you have a team, and especially if you know how to collaborate with VR and those pre-ET services, then that can really fulfill some of the students' transition services. All right, some more examples. So also from an actual IEP that we looked at in our state last year, this was listed for a student for their transition services. It said communication skills, reading, math, money skills. Okay. So, that's a lot. But again, if I pick this up, I wouldn't know exactly what service to provide the student, right? I don't know what around communication they need. I don't know exactly what around, money skills. Is it banking? Is it paying for things with cash? Is it using a debit card? I would have no idea. So let's try to strengthen this. How about instruction in answering and sending text messages? So maybe that's the communication instruction the student needs, is they just don't know how to, use their texting feature on their phone. So that's much more targeted. Instruction and practice and how to ask for help at work. Maybe that's the communication, skill and instruction the student needs, is advocating for themselves and knowing how to appropriately ask for help. Under reading, instruction in reading and adjusting recipes. So maybe the student is really interested in cooking, for example, and instead of just putting reading, we're going to really target the instruction around how does the student, read and understand recipes. I had a student wanted to be a baker so badly, and we actually finally got him employed at a bakery. But this is what we worked on in class is that, I had him read recipes, but then really understand, what does the vocabulary mean around stir and fold and mix and blend and right and all of those things. So we really targeted his reading around recipes because we knew how important that was going to be in his baking job. Here's another example, experience in using a variety of tools for monthly budgeting. So it says above money skills, but maybe it's very much, online banking is what the student needs, for example, or how to use a debit card. So trying to make those transition services targeted, individualized, based on assessment information. And if somebody were to pick up the IEP, they would know what the service is, right? The way that these are written, I have no idea. So here's another example of an IEP transition services for the student was communication skills, cleaning skills, job training, learning about VR. Okay, but again, I don't really know what the student needs for communication skills. I don't know what kinds of cleaning the student, needs to learn or job training, super vague. So let's see if we can make this more individualized and for the student. Instruction and practice in making food choices by using a switch. So maybe that's the communication skill, is that communicating their preference and their choice by using a switch, for example. And around the cleaning skills, actual instruction and practice with vacuuming. So maybe that's, something that the student wants to learn, or the parent really, wants the student to have that skill for home. And then related to job training, instruction and practice in using a pet brush. So this student is interested in being around animals, right? So let's see if we can teach that student on how to groom animals. So they would need some instruction on how to do that correctly. And it also says learning about VR and cleaning skills and job training, but how about we target that more specifically around instruction in use of a checklist at a restaurant job site, for example. So yeah, I think, the takeaway here is don't write these general things, but be more specific, right? And aligned with the students' post-secondary goals. So that's how we would fix those. Okay. Next, once we determine those transition services, then we come to the part of the transition plan that says course of study. Okay, what do we mean by that? What are courses of study? So it is required that on the transition plan, there is written a multi-year description of coursework. So what that means is, let's say the student is right now in 10th grade. We are not just going to list what they are taking in 10th. We are going to list what they're taking in 10th and 11th and 12th. So it's multi-year, right? So the idea is that given their post-secondary goals, we want to make sure that we are, mapping out the students' courses that make sense with those post-secondary goals. So we're looking for that alignment with the post-secondary goals. That's the third bullet here. And that we're considering their strengths and interests. So if the student is really interested in, culinary arts, we're not just going to put them in shop class, for example, right? Like it needs to be aligned. So there's a number of different ways that you can do this to be compliant. In fact, there are 3 different ways to be compliant for this. And, I don't have them on here, but I'm going to tell you what they are. So yes, you can actually list out every single course the student is taking in 10th grade, for example, 11th and 12th. But there's a simpler way to do it. You can attach the student's plan for college and career readiness. Now, every student in Utah should meet with and you guys probably all did this if you went to school in Utah, met with a counselor, mapped out what they're going to take in high school. Usually that happens the spring of 8th grade. So they've got that CCR plan going into 9th grade, and then they revisit that every year. So if the student has that, and hopefully they do, and they've met with a counselor and their parent, and they've mapped out the courses of study, that can be attached to the IEP. And you can type in there, see attached PCCR plan for college and career readiness. Or you can have a statement that says a student will take all courses required for graduation if they're going for a regular high school diploma, but then you also still want to list those electives that make sense, that are of their interest and preferences. And again, that third bullet that align with the post-secondary goals. So those are kind of the two components. There has to be that multi-year course of study, and we have to see that it makes sense and aligns with their post-secondary goals. So that's what's required there. And just some things to kind of, think about is, does it stand up to the stranger test? And what we mean by that is if the student moved from one school to another and there's just like weird names for courses, would a new teacher be able to pick up that IEP and go, oh, okay, I know what to enroll the student in? Sometimes our charter schools kind of have some interesting names for their courses. So just to kind of make sure that that is explicitly kind of written out and stated in case there's kind of confusion around that. And then courses of study should be individualized based on the student's needs and specifically aligned to those goals. And we kind of talked about that. So, all right. So now there needs to be at least one annual IEP goal that supports the student's transition service needs. So these are not on the transition plan. They are typically back on the annual goal page where all the other annual goals are for that student. But when we monitor, we will look back at the annual goals and kind of, ask the question, is there a goal there that is clearly either marked or clearly, identified as a transition goal? So there must be at least one annual goal that's linked to their transition service needs. So here's an example. So let's say the transition service is the students going to receive instruction on how to articulate, their disability and their needs, for example. The goal might be that the student, each semester talks to two of his gen ed teachers and tells, them what his accommodation needs are, for example. So that's an example of an annual IEP goal that relates to the student's transition service needs around self-advocacy. Just like any annual goal, it must be individualized, it must be a SMART goal, it must be observable, measurable, have the criteria, all the things that you have learned about annual IEP goals. This is again what the form looks like. LEAs have a little bit of leeway here, so they can choose how to document this section. The IEP goal can just kind of be copied and pasted from the annual goal page into this section of the transition plan, or it can be labeled. So, for example, in the blank space, it could say, refer to goal number goal number 1 under transition, or maybe it's goal number 4 under communication, for example. So they just have to have direct, way to communicate which annual goal really aligns with the student's transition service needs and their post-secondary goal. Some things around effective practice, making sure that, transition annual goals can be like the ones I just shared with you, like around self-advocacy, communication, it could be behavior, right? Like all of these things are going to impact a student's post-secondary goals and their outcomes. So also, we want to also make sure that it's really specifically linked to their post-secondary goals and that it makes sense. Here are some examples. I'm not going to read them all to you, but you guys have this, this PowerPoint presentation, but these are just some examples of what we would consider annual goals that are really specific to transition. And then last, but definitely not least, and we spent a lot of time talking about this, last week or the week before, around the coordinating services with outside agencies. But in terms of what that looks like in the transition plan, this is the question that has to be on the transition plan. It says, are the post-secondary transition services, experiences and or specialized instruction listed above likely to be provided or paid for by other agencies? And I think that's some sort of a misleading question, because in some cases, the student might not already be connected with an outside agency, and an outside agency might not be providing anything yet. However, the potential is there, right? So we really do want to connect students with outside agencies. We want to specifically connect them with those pre-ETS services. And even though they are free to the parent, to the student, to the LEA, those services, somebody's providing and paying for them, right? In most cases, that's federal or state funding coming from vocational rehabilitation. So don't let this question scare you away from checking the box. Yes, is essentially what I'm saying, right? So if you invite a VR counselor or a pre-ETS provider to the IEP and they might be providing services, then you can absolutely check the box here. Yes. I think more often than not, we see a lot of teachers just checking no for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's a little bit of a confusing question. And the other is because if you check yes, of course, that then triggers that you need to have consent from the parent before inviting an outside agency. So that, that's where it takes one extra step. But it is highly encouraged that we want to invite outside agency representatives. So, really think about this. And again, we just recently added this idea of basis for decision. So if you're saying no, why? I mean, we really feel that most students with disabilities can really benefit from outside agency involvement and services. So don't be quick to just answer, check the box no. This obviously requires a little bit of preparation. You've got to know who to reach out to. You've got to get the consent from the parent, and then, hope that you can't control whether or not that outside agency rep is going to, in fact, attend the IEP, but, certainly put the effort into inviting them and telling the parent why it's important. So think about that. So when do I invite that outside agency representative? We already mentioned that the documentation that another agency was considered. So, either one of those boxes has to be checked, either the no or the yes. Hopefully you're checking the yes, then getting the consent. It has to be written consent. So we do have to see a signature, but it can be electronic if your LEA has that, kind of built in. It can be emailed to the parents. So you don't have to wait for paper to come back in the backpack, for example. And we have to make sure that that written consent was dated prior to the IEP. So in other words, we don't want the parents signing it the day of the IEP. It really has to have been done prior to that. All right. I think we, talked a lot about all the different potential agency representatives you'd want to invite. The biggest one here is that vocational rehabilitation counselor and pre-ETS. And then there are obviously this other list of services, and there may be, the list is endless, right? There could be more, especially in a particular community. So think about this more broadly. What makes sense if the student is with DSPD or Division of Services for People with Disabilities, they're in services. In most cases, they have a support coordinator. You'd really want to make sure that person is there too, because they're writing a plan for the student, and that way you can align plans and services. And so it's always great to have everyone at the table that's working with the student. Ask the parent too, right? All right. We talked a little bit about pre-employment transition services, and I think what I will do is I'll probably go ahead and link in the Canvas course a flyer on pre-ETS. So if you don't know a lot about it, that will really explain what that service is. I don't want to make this video too long, so I won't go into lots of detail about that. And then, I think it's just to your benefit to really just learn what's out there. Go to transition fairs, reach out, go to conferences, come to the Transition Institute that we have every year. You will learn about a ton about, outside agencies, and you'll develop relationships with contacts, and that's so valuable. And start talking really early to parents and students about this. I know it might feel weird and they might not be ready for this. You're having this conversation with the students in 8th or 9th grade and the parents just trying to get through the year. But it is important. Parents need to kind of hear about how these services are relevant and why it's important to learn about them and connect early. So keep that in mind. This is just a case study of a student who's 20, has a complex need. If you would like to read through this, this is kind of a plap-up statement. And then what this does is it shows how all of the components of the transition plan have been, written out. So essentially, this is sort of an example of the activity that you're going to be doing for either Carla, the other case study, or a student that you're working with. So that's what that is. So I think we talked a lot last week, right, about the predictors. So that's essentially what this is. So I'm not going to go over this again because I think you got a lot of great information on what the predictors are. And what this is actually is when I talked at the very intro video a few weeks back, I talked about the post-school outcome survey and how we call every student that's left our schools that had an IEP in place, and we ask them, what are you doing the year you've been out of school? And these are just responses that we got from students and parents about what experiences they had in their Utah high schools that really helped them be successful in employment when they got out. So, think about that. And a lot of this really aligns with the predictors that you learned about last week. So work-based learning internships, a lot of students and families said, if I had not had that, CTE internship, I wouldn't have known what I wanted to do. I wouldn't be employed right now. Learning how to use public transit, that really opens up a lot of doors, right, for students to be able to move around the community. A lot of students get the opportunity to take technical college classes, concurrent enrollment classes at the tech colleges while they're in high school. We know CT pathways and certificates are, hugely beneficial to students. And social skills, and of course, those self-advocacy skills are huge. So these are just some other things to think about. How do we get students work experience while they're in school? I'm not going to read them all, but essentially, I think it's important that we continue to talk to parents about this and really look for opportunities to get students in employment settings, no matter their disability. Number of different ways to do that. And then here are a whole bunch of other examples, resources, but I've put a lot of these already on the Canvas platform. So they're there for you. And that is pretty much it for today. And sorry that was kind of long, but it's really hard to do this any shorter because there's a lot to go on the transition plan. So please reach out if you have particular questions. But otherwise, I think we pretty much covered it. I look forward to seeing your transition plan on a student or on the case study. And then I will see you all next week. Thanks.